This episode is sponsored by the Bridge to Recovery, a nonprofit program on 115 acres near Bowling Green, Kentucky, a tranquil place where they've been changing lives for over 40 years. Their people improve their quality of life by acknowledging past emotional wounds and healing from all forms of trauma. The CEO, Paul Hamlin, has been a friend of mine for 20 years. Call him directly at 858-945-7848. That's 858-945-7848. Or you can learn more about the Bridge to Recovery by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting thebridgetorecovery.com. Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are.
This is Joan Marineau, and this is The Path to Authenticity.
My name's Tom Gentry. Thanks for listening. In this episode, you'll hear my conversation with Joan Marineau. Joan's a therapist in private practice in North Palm Beach, Florida, specializing in relationship issues, codependency, trauma. And, she's pretty highly thought of, highly regarded therapist around the country. And she's been doing this kind of work for a really long time. I first started hearing about her more than 20 years ago now. I heard people refer to this program called The Present, which had a great reputation. It was a week-long intensive therapeutic treatment program for people suffering with codependency and trauma. And it was Joan's program. She created it and ran it. Eventually, she opted just to stay in private practice and not to do that anymore. But what she has maintained is an annual retreat that takes place every September. So that's coming up. So Joan, she is pretty well known, especially in the therapeutic community in South Florida. So I'd heard about her for a really long time, and then I met her probably about 10 years ago at this point, and began a friendship with her about 5 years ago. I've been divorced for about 6 years and have really only been in one serious relationship since then. But it was with a foreign adoptee. And Joan adopted a little girl from China. And some of my friends suggested that we talk to Joan. So we began a friendship, began getting to know each other. Our kids have spent time together. And I've come to, over the years, really lean on Joan when I've had clients with adoption issues, especially foreign adoptees. It's always great when you're helping people to have someone to kind of lean on and bounce ideas off of. And Joan has become a support for me. So I really wanted to have her on the show to talk about adoption because it's one of those things that I have come to learn and, learned from my experience with Joan and with the significant other I had, that it's pretty misunderstood in our culture. We kind of have this attitude of, with adopted kids, oh, lucky you were adopted. When in truth, it's not the greatest thing for a person to need to be adopted. So, a lot of times their feelings are invalidated as it relates to that. So, Joan and I talk a lot about parenthood. She talks about, how being a therapist has affected her parenthood. And I'm sure greatly benefited her little girl song. I know it has. But Joan really loves being a mother. And, I think that's something we really share in common. One thing I knew for sure always is that I wanted to be a dad. And I love being a dad. And Joan, I think just as much wanted to be a mother and loves being a mother. So, I'm just really grateful that Joan took the time to be on the show. We cover a lot of stuff here. We cover kind of the early years of addiction treatment in South Florida, which if you don't know, over the years has been a place where people, including myself, come to get better. People who are suffering from addiction. So, and Joan was here kind of at the beginning of that. And we know a lot of the same people who were around, kind of the people who Joan worked with in the beginning of her career. I trained with, they trained me in the beginning of my career. And I feel really grateful about that. But anyway, I think you're going to love hearing from Joan. She's got so much heart, and just enjoy. Joan Marineau.
Just the product of some bad seeds.
My role in this area for the longest time has been as a clinician. But in 2019, my passion, like yours, is being a mom. All the roads led to this ultimate career.
Right.
Of raising my daughter. I got here the long way.
Right.
Because it wasn't until I was 52 that I actually got here. So it certainly wasn't on my radar. It wasn't, I anticipated being a mom, but I anticipated being a mom, getting married and having kids and
Right.
having a mom that way. I never anticipated being a mom like this.
Right.
Single, with a big tribe and a daughter from China. That was not, that penny dropped in 2005.
So, what was your childhood like?
So similar to yourself, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in the great state of Michigan, in a large Catholic family with 6 brothers and sisters. I was the oldest of the 3 little kids, and that's important. Yes. I was the 5th oldest. And when you tell people that, they always say, well, weren't you the 3rd youngest? No. I was the 5th oldest.
Right.
And being the oldest of 3 little kids, I was also the designated rescuer of my parents when they were in crisis, when their drinking had accelerated and they were out of control. It was my job to either go out and separate them or hang with my little brother and sister and tell them it was going to be okay. No matter what, it was going to be okay, which is a mantra I've used my entire life when I'm terrified. So I love being part of a big family. And I think that resonates with my life in 2019. I have a big tribe of friends. Mm-hmm. My family's kind of spread around. But I still feel that sense of big tribe. I like the big tribe. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I graduated from high school and I came down to Florida, my father was very successful. And he had a home down here. And I came down here to look for employment. I had finished an associate's degree in social work, and I was trained to work with mentally retarded adults. That's what I was going to do. And I came down here and I got an interview at CARP.
So tell everyone what CARP is.
Comprehensive Alcohol Rehabilitation Program. It was in West Palm Beach. It's almost a little surreal to me that I have to tell people, because back in the 80s, it was the premier treatment center. It was ginormous. It had arms all over. And the position I was applying for was at A.G. Holly Hospital, the tuberculosis hospital, one of the only tuberculosis hospitals really around. It was primarily for migrant workers who had tuberculosis that was so rampant that they had to take them out of the community because it was treatable. But if they were drinking, they wouldn't take their meds, and it just continued to show up. So CARP had dropped a treatment center within the hospital, and that was the place that I was interviewing for. I was 21 years old, and I remember coming home from my interview, and my father was drinking a martini, and it was probably 11 o'clock. And I said, I think I got a job. He said, "You did? Where'd you get it?" And I said, "At CARP." And he said, "Why would you want to work with a bunch of drunks?" Something about that. I dog-eared, like, that is I wonder what that is, because at the time I had not seen my parents as having a drinking problem, because I was under the illusion that they had to be, Skid Row bums.
Right, under a bridge.
Exactly. And my parents did not fit that bill at all. So I worked in the field for 6 years before I was intervened on, before my codependency had become so debilitating physically, emotionally, relationship-wise, had become so debilitating that my director of the program I was working at PBI sat me down and said, "You need to get help." And I remember going, "Oh man, I knew the day would come." I knew the day would come. So, all right, most therapists eventually have to go to therapy. So, okay, who are you recommending that I see? He goes, No, I don't want you to see anyone. I want you to go to a 30-day inpatient codependency treatment center. I remember going, I think I literally stopped breathing. I think I probably looked a little bluish. I was dumbfounded. I came up with every excuse. I got a dog. No, we're going to give you the time off. We're going to pay for it. I'm sure somebody will take care of your dog. You're going. And I remember telling my parents, and my father got misty-eyed. And it was the first recognition of recognizing his shame of what had happened. And my mother and my sister actually came in to the family program. And it was one of the best and worst experiences of my life. It was one of those pivotal, painful, I can feel it in my throat, painful, frightening moments of pure terror that I was going to go over the edge and I wasn't coming back, that I would go crazy, that all those feelings I had stockpiled were going to be the demise of me. And it wasn't. And it was also during a time, and I'm sure you're familiar with this as well, Tom, where treatment for both alcoholism and codependency was brutal. In fact, the woman who was the director of the program wrote a book called Who Do You Think You Are? And it wasn't like a curious question. It was a belittling, like, who do you think you are? You're no better than the rest of us. And I remember in a group of 40 people, her looking at me and saying, "You're a therapist? I can't believe you're a therapist. You are one sick woman." And I remember my face burning with shame. Like, I'm a fraud. I mean, I had already thought it anyway. So, I mean, she was confirming something that I believed. And that also I dog-eared. Like, I am never, ever going to treat another human being with that kind of disregard again. Ever, 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 ever. Because back in those days, it was, aggressive and brutal, and the belief system.
Confrontational.
Yes. Cut them off and rebuild them and let them know just how despicable they are, and your best thinking got you here, and you're no better. And, it was humiliating. It was humiliating therapy. And being on the other side of it, I was like, oh, this is so wrong. Never, ever again will I do that. I will not treat another human being with that kind of disregard again. And that was a turning point for me. I remember my clients actually saying to me, boy, you've become so much more compassionate. And I thought, oh, thank God. Yeah. Thank God that is the truth. Because today, when I tell people just how brutal and angry and aggressive I was, we had a program called TLC, and it wasn't tender, loving confrontation. It was just confrontation. And it was no care, zero care. And I ran that with another clinician. We were the Doberman, the pit bulls. I survived that group. And I look back on that and I go, how many amends do I have to make? So those were, that was the start that really began my own personal evolution and my own personal growth, and taking my own pulse instead of the pulse of the person that I was working with, and recognizing connection was the key to the therapeutic relationship.
Well, and coming from a place of love, it's funny because, I've learned that lesson too over the course of my career. And the treatment that I experienced wasn't as confrontational, but there was an element of that. And I've thought about it a lot recently, because thank God I had a therapist who was sophisticated and experienced enough to know that if I tell him he doesn't matter right now, it will get through to him and he will do what he needs to do to get better. So she used just enough of that to get me to keep going, but also would say things like, I love you and I understand that you have no idea how that could possibly be true. So,
yes,
and
a wonderful
it's
mix.
The lady who works from the office down the hall from you.
Yeah.
And there have just been so many gifts that I've experienced. People, I could go on and on about that. But, one thing I want to touch on is you mentioned CARP. And, we're in Palm Beach County, which has for many, many years been known as a place where people come to recover from addiction. And it's been that way for a long time. And I came down here from Indiana in 96. And the way I describe it is that at that time, there were maybe a half dozen programs, but they were all really, really good. And it has mushroomed a lot over the last 20 plus years. But CARP, from my point of view, coming like 10 or so years later than you, is CARP was the training ground for a lot of really brilliant people who went on to create successful, just remarkable programs, that some of which are still out there and are doing great, great work.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I would say that when I came down here and I started working for CARP, what was the key to it is that people worked there because they were passionate about the work.
Right.
They weren't passionate about the pay. I can guarantee you that.
Right.
And the hours were just insane.
Yeah.
And it allowed you not only to work, and when I started, I was at A.G. Holly, and then I moved over to the outpatient. But I was so hungry to learn that I would go to the detox center and volunteer, and I would go to TPNM, treatment planning and motivation, and volunteer. And I would go to the domiciliary, which was for the elderly, the senior addicts who really had no place to go. They had a little dog. It was the cutest little dog called Dynamo. And because many of them suffered from, serious, chronic wet brain or organicity as a result of their alcoholism, this little dog, when it walked, it was like a pile of clouds because they never remembered when they put the flea powder on it. So everyone was putting the flea powder on the dog. It was so, Dynamo was like this little pig pen that would walk around and a flurry of clouds would come off of it.
But it's beautiful also because they were taking care of that.
They were so invested in wanting to make sure that dog was not bit or hurt and they overfed it because it was a chubby little dog and a powdery little dog. But it allowed us, for those of us who were really hungry to learn, it allowed us a format of just like every single slice of the impact of the disease of alcoholism and drug addiction as well, because Olive Branch was opened as well. And Bob Bazone, who was the clinical director, executive director at that time, was just passionate and growing it. So it was, I couldn't agree with you more, the training ground.
And I feel really lucky because when I came in, a lot of those people were then at a place in their career where they could hire me and train me. And I always have been really grateful that I could benefit from that, because now that I'm further along and in that position, there aren't as many people like Joan Marineau and Bob Bazone. And I mean, they're just, it's not as many people have that luxury that I had, and the difference, one of the key differences is that the quality of the treatment was really, really high compared to now. In a lot of cases, it's still there. It's just not as common. And a lot of people who come through a situation like mine where I got treatment, eventually worked in treatment. I had really good treatment, and then I worked in really good treatment. I know what good treatment looks like, and some people don't.
Yeah.
They don't know what good treatment looks like. And, Mike Lobert,
yes,
one of the things he said to me a few years ago is that, the thing about bad treatment is that, when a person gets bad treatment, it's worse than having had no treatment at all, because they think they've had good treatment and they haven't.
Well said. Yeah, well said. And I think that the difference really is about putting the patient first and the money second.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, we lost the plot.
Yeah.
The field has lost the plot a bit. And that was never true of CARP. Right. CARP was always about the patient. And I learned there, it could be their 100th admission. You treat them like it's their first. Right. You always treat them like it's their first. You don't lose hope or faith that they can get it.
Right. And you treat people with dignity and respect.
100%.
Which, more often than not, people with addiction issues are kind of starved for that when they show up at a treatment facility.
Well, the echo in their own brain, the judgment and the self-loathing and the hatred is so profound. They can't even imagine that somebody could look at them and see the soul of them. It was funny. I was listening to a series on mindfulness, and Jack Kornfield was talking about his encounter with the Dalai Lama. And he was saying to the Dalai Lama, how do you deal with self-hatred? And the Dalai Lama, who struggles with the English language on occasion, had an interpreter. And the interpreter, he looked at the interpreter like, what does that mean? And the interpreter explained it. And he still looked incredibly puzzled, like, I still don't understand, what does that mean? And when he finally got the concept, he looked at Jack and went, that makes no sense. We don't struggle with that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know how to help you with that, because it's just so foreign.
Right.
And yet, in the United States, it's not just the addicts who struggle with it. It's something I hear in my office over and over again. And I can experience as well. If I stumble and fumble and that voice in my head goes, you idiot, what were you thinking? That judgment is so pervasive.
Well, and one of the things I've observed is, and I've, had this attitude at times, the ultimate expression of that is when, there have been times in my life when someone has loved me and I have looked down on them for loving me. That is the ultimate expression of salvation.
Isn't that an amazing thing? That old saying, you can't be a fan in your own fan club.
Right. I wouldn't want to be a club that would have me
exactly.
Groucho Marx.
Exactly.
Well, it's interesting because, I wanted to talk to you about adoption because you've become over the years my go-to person with guidance around those issues. And how you kind of stumbled into that maybe deeper awareness of adoption than you probably had before, which is definitely the case for me. But the beginning of your career kind of worked the same way, where it was like a way for you to resolve some of your own family stuff.
100%.
Right. And then now, the same thing happens when we become a parent, because if there's a button to be pushed, it will get pushed by that child. It's one of the things I began to observe when my son was very, very young is that a lot of those things that were said to me as a child by my parents or siblings that I thought, I will never say that, they just automatically came out of my mouth.
Yep. So true.
Yeah.
So true.
And it's so powerful, the things that happen to us in our childhood. So if you're like me, and I think you are, is that you always wanted to be a parent.
Yes, I did. And, when I look back on the unfolding of my life, and you're absolutely right. I found my way to the field because there was a lot of scar tissue that needed to be addressed and healed and walked through. And then when I met my husband, he was in recovery. He was sober 10 years when I met him, and actually was a ball player for CARP, softball team. And so there were a lot of overlaps. And when I met him, because of his disease, he was crystal clear. I will not have children. I don't believe I'd be a good dad. I don't believe there was still so much self-hatred and distrust that he was like, I know you want kids. I don't want kids. So if that's where you want to go, we're not doing that. And I said, okay, I think I'm going to take a pass, because I always envisioned having lots of kids and maybe a husband, maybe not, just lots of kids. I was going to have lots of kids. So, after a period of, 6 or 8 months, I doubled back and said, I really, really like you. I really would like to investigate. And we were married 10 wonderful, amazing years. During that time, right before our divorce, I got trained in Imago, in couples relationship counseling. And I finished that training in 2000 and 2002. My husband at the time decided he did not want sobriety in his life anymore. And there was just no way I could work in a marriage with the disease. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And he was very clear. It's not a maybe. It's not an if. I don't want sobriety anymore. I don't. I had to really respect that. I had to lean into somebody making a choice in their life that ultimately was going to end their life in a horribly brutal way.
Mm-hmm.
And yet at first I thought it was like God making a mockery of the fact that I just completed this workshop and here I am going through a divorce. It was such an incredible gift. I was able to uncouple with all the tools that I learned in Imago. I was given the incredible grace and forgiveness and compassion for him. I was clear I didn't possess him, so it wasn't like an affrontal to me.
Right.
And I was able to let go with love. About 2 years later, I'm sitting at a craft show. I had just made all these little crafts, which is one of my passions and hobbies. I was sitting at a craft show and I turned to my best friend and I said, I think I want to have a kid. And she's like, a kid? You don't even have a boyfriend. I'm like, well, I don't need to like biologically have a kid. I want to be a parent. I've always wanted to be a parent. I want to be a parent. And she said, well, what do you know about it? I said, I know absolutely nothing about it. However, my brother just got back from China. I don't know why I'm pulled towards China. Maybe it was Sex in the City and seeing, the adoption. I don't know, but I'm going to reach out to him. And it was within like a month that I was put into a lottery in 2005 to, as a single mom, adopt from China. And then it morphed into a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years of waiting for my referral, for my dossier to be connected to my daughter. And I say it was 2 elephant pregnancies. It was not one because of the length of time. And my family was they were worried for me. They really felt like it was not going to happen. I had turned my guest room into a nursery because I was told it was going to be a 9-month wait. I had quilted a blanket for her. I had her room all set up. It was ready to go, and dust collected. And probably about year 4, I think my family was prepared to do an intervention. Like, let's turn the guest room back into a guest room. It's not a nursery. She's not coming. Mm-hmm. And I had gone to a workshop, and at that workshop, they were talking about the Stockdale paradox. And the Stockdale paradox is a fascinating one. And it was written, he actually wrote a book, but it was also in Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. Jim Collins interviewed a bunch of companies and researched how is it that a company went from good to great. And in my couples counseling, I was required to read that because it was also about how do couples go from good to great. And in that book, they talked about the Stockdale paradox. Jim Collins met with Colonel Stockdale and James Stockdale and interviewed him on how is it you became great. And he was a prisoner of war in the Vietnam conflict for 9 years. He was a colonel, so he was brutalized. He was tortured and mostly kept in solitary confinement. And on rare occasions, he was given the ability to go out and walk around amongst the general population. And what he realized is that men were dying, and they were dying of hopelessness. And they would set times. They would say, I'm going to get out by Christmas. And when Christmas would come and go and they didn't get out, they became more despondent until eventually they died of a will to live, a failure to thrive. What he realized is that he did not invest in that. He invested in uncertainty, or what we call eternal time versus clock time. That he had a faith that he was going to get out, he was going to write about it, and he was going to see his wife again. But he gave up all clock time. He just leaned into the belief it was going to happen. And he said, in that, he lived in the moment. He was able to endure the torture, and he had a firm belief that things were going to change, but he didn't know when or how that was going to happen. And it was so wonderful that I heard that, because I knew my daughter was coming. I didn't know when she was going to come. I didn't know how that was going to happen, but I knew she was going to come. I was not a little doubt in my mind that she was going to be mine. And I remember when the picture came over my computer, and I was in my Lake Worth office, and it didn't have Wi-Fi connection. So I had to drive to Dunkin' Donuts, sit down, my hands were shaking. I opened the folder and I saw her eyes. I was like, oh my God. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You not only, promised that she was coming, but what you delivered was just the most incredible little soul I could have ever imagined.
Wow. And that book, that has played a role in my career too. I forgot about that part of it. The part that I associate with that is belonging on the bus.
Yes, I love that.
Being in the right seat on the bus. And
getting the ones off that don't need to be
Which
on that bus.
Which really is relevant with relationships.
100%.
I haven't had the right person on the bus yet.
And knowing that and being able to get them off the bus without feeling bad and guilty and horrible, because they're not on the right bus either.
Right. You're right. Yeah, the best employment experience I ever had, they had us read that book. And
it's a brilliant book.
By that philosophy.
The show horse versus the plow horse, the fact that leadership does make a difference, a profound difference. I love the analogy.
And also the transparency, and it's safe to give real feedback. You don't have to pretend everything's okay to protect the egos of the powers that be.
Exactly.
Think about what, the relevance of that right now in our history.
And I can add one more that has great relevance in regards to what we're experiencing at this moment, the window versus the mirror. That if in fact something is thriving, you look out the window and you look at how it's thriving because of those who are supporting it versus the mirror that it's all about. It's thriving because of me.
Right.
Because I'm making it thrive.
Yeah, which really isn't.
No, and it defies the connection. It defies the connection, which, when I am running a group or I'm at a treatment center and I talk to them about eye to eye, knee to knee, you need to see the person who's across from you. And they go, I don't like to look at people. I don't like to look in their eyes. And I go, I get it. Come on. There's been so much shame, and God forbid somebody look in your eyes and see that you're high or that you're not telling the truth. But in 2019, if you are not connected, your disease will devour you.
Yeah.
It will devour you. You have to remain connected. Just have to.
Well, and, the proliferation of social media and text messaging and all of that is it's, in some ways it's enhanced connection because maybe you have a greater number of connections, but the quality of the connections are so different. And the way it plays out in my life is, so many people now who I meet they don't want to talk on the phone. All they want to do is text.
Yeah.
Which I get it, but if you're going to invest in another human being, it takes more than text messaging, and so much gets lost in the communication.
Or misinterpreted. The stories that come up as a result of a text, I'll have clients bring in their phone and they go, can I just read you this text? I go, absolutely not. Because it will only be your story I'm going to hear. Until you have an opportunity to investigate through, I say, FaceTime, if in fact you are can't get to each other.
Right.
It has to be in FaceTime. I know a couple that I work with that he's a pilot and she is an attendant on a plane, and they're apart a great deal of the time, and stories can get written. And one of the things that she has told me is that once we see each other FaceTime, everything softens.
Mm-hmm.
All the sharp edges are no longer present. It's amazing what we see. In fact, they say that the reason why you go through a drive-through, why they now post what you just ordered on the drive-through, is because if there is not eye-to-eye contact when you're placing an order, the amount of mistakes that are made are incredible. Wow. So because they still want to have drive-throughs, they write what you just ordered, because they were just pelted with errors. Right. Error. That it is that snapshot, that attachment that allows us to actually process information and data. And the other interesting thing, I just saw this the other day, Tom, was that they said that as a result of us bending down, looking at our phone so often, that there are horns that are developing.
Oh my gosh, in the back of our necks.
Yes.
Oh my
We're
gosh.
developing little baby horns on the back of our necks.
Yeah, wow.
The little horned community. Isn't that something?
Oh my gosh.
Little
it's
bone
scary.
spurs are developing from looking down at our phone so much.
Well, speaking of eye contact, one of the things I learned from you over the years is that when you make an apology and the other, when you're in that conversation with someone, it's really, really good to make eye contact.
100%.
But also, my favorite picture of my son and I is the first time I held him. One of the nurses captured a photo of us the first time we made eye contact. And you mentioned when you saw your daughter, her eyes, even a 2D image.
Yeah.
When you see the eyes are so powerful.
Unbelievable. I have a series of pictures when my daughter was placed in my arms. We were in a room that was super small, and it probably was uniting 50 families with children that were terrified, and family members that were as terrified as those children were. And the volume, the vibration and the volume in that room, I perched myself back by a window just so I could steal my heart from all of that chaotic energy, because I really wanted to be as peaceful and as still and as present as I possibly could when my daughter was placed in my arm, because I knew she was going to be just terrified. She was 10 months old. She had been placed in a van. She had never been out of the orphanage. There were 42 children with 2 caretakers, so she hadn't been held a lot. Many of them had gotten sick on the van. They were disoriented. My friend captured a picture of her being carried in by the van driver, and he was holding her out like a little
she was
animal.
on fire or something.
Yeah, like I don't want to get burned. I mean, this kid is like screaming, and the terror in her was just profound. So I'm sitting on the couch. I'm holding my daughter. I'm trying to still her. I'm trying to still myself. And my friend is snapping a picture. And at one moment, we both look at her and we have this terrified look, just like she looks terrified. I look terrified. It is just a terrifying picture. And then she captured a moment where I'm holding her and she looks, I'm saying, Mama, Mama, I'm here. Mama's here. And she looks up and her eyes connect with my eyes. And I go, we're home. We're home, honey. You're home. And from that moment, our souls were linked. There is not a shadow of a doubt. In fact, I had said to you when you asked if I would be willing to talk and include adoption, I said, I need to run this by my daughter and see what she thinks. And I said, Kirsong, what do you think about me talking about adoption? She said, I think it's great. Can I come too? And I said, I don't think that's going to work, honey, but is there something important that you want me to convey when I'm talking about adoption? And she says, I will pick you, Mama, over anyone else on the planet.
Wow.
And it just fills my heart when I think how blessed I am that, that there was a divine plan that picked us to learn from each other, grow with each other, grow together. I'm beyond thankful.
And as I'm listening to you and we're talking about this, what I'm thinking about is how blessed she is. Because I have come to learn that adoption is so misunderstood. And to have someone as an adoptive parent who has the insight, the compassion, aside just from the fact that you wanted to be a mother so badly. You also, I mean, you're a trained professional. So, and that doesn't always work with our families, as you well know, but you know how to validate her.
Yeah. And I say that in tongue in cheek because, one of my own bruises growing up in a family that had addiction was minimization. I'm a minimizer. It's not that bad. It was my survival mechanism. Deny. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. So validation has come late in my life. I mean, really late in my life. I think my friends and my family members and coworkers would say, yeah, Joan is definitely still in process with that validation piece because there's still that knee-jerk response of dial it down. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. So, of course, I adopt a maximizer. I mean, she dials it up. It's a 911. If something happens where she can't get her shirt on, like this morning, she couldn't get her shirt on, and the screams coming out of the room, and I'm like, oh my God. Okay. Validate. It just doesn't come. The first thing is like, come on. Are you kidding me? Come on, Song, you can get your shirt on. So that old saying that the shoemaker's kids goes without shoes, I know as a therapist, many therapists I know have kids that are not doing that great. So, to continue to remind myself that, and I've told people 100 times, I don't work with kids. That is not my specialty. Anytime one of my clients say, one of my kids is having a difficult time, would you see him? I'm like, I don't work with kids. Let me give you some great referrals. It's not that is not my strong suit.
And I believe you probably helped me in that way over the years. Yeah.
It is, the thing that I am grateful for is that I've been teachable. I've been curious. I attend an adoption support group. I meet with other parents. They are amazing at validating me around, that happens and it's okay. Because for me, the anxiety around, is this normal? Am I making mistakes here? To have other parents say, I went through that too. Or, that happened as well. Just once again, no different than that woman who was sitting on the windowsill in that adoption center, just trying to still my own anxiety around not doing it right.
Well, and this is a good time, speaking of minimization, and I, have very similar background when it comes to that, one of my survival skills, but minimization is very relevant when it comes to adoption and how we deal with it as a culture, because we tend to, in general, look at adopted children and think, lucky you. you were one of the lucky ones. You got to be adopted and not remain an orphan. When in truth, that human being experienced the most profound loss that they could have, a person could possibly experience at the beginning of their life. At the beginning of their life. And so to treat an adopted child without kind of having that in the back of your mind it must be really difficult for adopted children.
Brilliant. Absolutely. And, one of my favorite books to recommend to parents that have adopted is 20 Things Adopted Kids Wish Their Adoptive Parents Knew by Sherry Eldridge. It's a brilliant book because what it showcases is exactly what you're talking about. That when I take Song, especially if I take her around an Asian population, like if we go to the nail salon,
right.
and they'll say, "Oh, you lucky baby, aren't you the luckiest? Look how lucky you got to come to America." And I'm like, no, that's not necessarily true every day.
Yeah.
Sometimes she wishes she was in China.
Well, because there's a reason why she was screaming the way she was.
You betcha. You betcha. And the thing that they talk about in this 20 things adopted kids wish their adoptive parents knew, one of them is just that, that their birthdays are hard.
Right.
We think they're great celebrations and isn't it wonderful, but that is the day that they, in China, that was the day my daughter was left in front of a garage with an adoption drop-off site where kids are left.
And also, was that even the day?
Yeah, and exactly. We don't know with 100% clarity. They certainly, based on her development, based on what was going on with her biologically, they assume it was the second day of her life, and so they identified that as her birthday. But yeah, there's sadness, there's anger, and guess what? The person who's closest to them is going to get the anger, which is got to be us. And that if we personalize it, if we take that on as, how could you possibly look at all I've done for you, blah, 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 blah.
Or even if you just see it as the child is misbehaving without considering, why aren't you happy on your birthday?
Right.
Well, birthdays are really, really difficult, just to be a parent who isn't informed with that, can lead to a lot of difficulty.
A major disconnect, a major misunderstanding, and a loss of an opportunity to process that.
Yeah. Wow. And then, you mentioned the fact that, how she's treated as an Asian adoptee. That adds a whole different dimension to all this.
Exactly. And interesting enough, in our culture right now, there is an assumption that because she's Asian, she's automatically smart.
Right. Mathematician.
Exactly. Respectful.
Right.
And follows everything that you ask them to do. And, it's just not true.
Yeah.
And the pressure from some of my friends who have adopted and their kids are older, the pressure that they have to perform and exceed expectations. They have a little joke that an F for an Asian is an A minus. That you cannot go below an A, that's really failure if you go below an A. So there's an enormous amount of pressure and expectations and how they're going to show up in the world. And, with every stereotype, there's a thread of truth.
Yes.
But it's not all true.
Right.
And so that is another piece. And we haven't crossed the bridge, and I'm a little surprised that I haven't heard her friends go, "That's your mother? She doesn't look like you," or "She's a lot older," or we haven't crossed that bridge. I don't know if that's a good thing, Tom, that there is more room for differences in 2019 than, 20 years ago. I'm praying that that's true, that the diversity is becoming the norm, because I know that there are a lot of parents in my daughter's school who are grandparents who have adopted their children's kids, and they're older like myself. And it's just matter of fact. It's not unusual.
Well, this is very personal to me because I'm the youngest of 8.
Yeah.
And my mom was 43 when she had me. My dad was, 48, 49 years old. And, so growing up, I was born in the early 70s and, elementary school in the late 70s, early 80s. And there's one event that I remember I will never forget was, bringing my parents to the chili supper in 3rd or 4th grade, and a little girl saying, "Why'd you bring your grandparents?"
Yeah.
And it hurt. It hurt as a little 8-year-old boy. It hurt. And, and I think it's just because none of us want to feel different. We want to feel connected to everyone around us. And speaking of minimization, I don't remember which of my siblings I talked to about that, but I did confide in one of them about that happening and that it made me sad or whatnot. And it was one of my sisters. I remember her saying, yeah, but we have great parents. Our mom and dad are the best mom and dad you could ever want. And so that was my, yeah, but I have I didn't focus on the age anymore, and just focused on the fact that I'm lucky I have good parents, which is true, but it is what I did is what I have come to know as an emotional bypass.
Yeah.
I didn't allow myself to experience that sadness. And so I kind of carried it around, and, and you multiply that times 30, 100 times in your life for all different reasons, and you're a pretty sad person.
Yeah.
So, a lot of my personal growth has been, especially in the last several years, just been about allowing myself to experience my sadness, even if I really didn't know what it was about.
Mm-hmm.
Just having the understanding that, the emotional bypass, the spiritual bypass, that stuff doesn't work. We carry it around in our bodies. And until we allow ourselves to experience the emotion, until it passes through us and we get back to neutral, it's going to be there. Or else it's going to come out in some ugly way, like my alcoholism.
Right. Right.
So,
and, that's another area that I feel being a therapist is a little bit of a hindrance, because I remember when Song was in preschool right here at Faith Lutheran, and I was reading all this information, and I was determined not to have her have any emotional bypasses. So I was trying to hand feed her these emotions, like, I bet there's times you're really sad that mommy doesn't have long dark hair. Right. I bet your mama was, beautiful, round eyes like you, baby. And the school called me and said, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" "She's a mess." She is dysregulated. She's reactive all over the place. I'm like, oh my God. I'm trying to push her too fast. I'm trying to get her there too quickly. And I had to look at the fact it will unfold when it's going to unfold. I need to just be aware that when it comes up, to be curious about it, to give her permission to talk about it without hand feeding it to her. Because that was really one of the first lessons I learned at CARP. The first lesson I learned at CARP was I was being supervised in outpatient. I was having somebody watch my session, and I really thought I was brilliant. I came up with these wonderful interpretations and really powerful, connection of dots. And the client left, and my supervisor went, "Well, that was a fail." I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" He said, "You're pretty smart, but you never connected to the client." I'm like, "Oh, shoot."
Right.
If you're not at the same place at the same time with whomever you're with, you've lost the opportunity of connection. And that has stuck with me for a long time. When I think I'm being so smart and so insightful, and it's the worst session ever, the client goes, "Well, that didn't go so well." I'm like, "Really?" And the times that I just sit and listen and let them know I'm listening and let them know that they're being heard, they'll go, "This was one of the best sessions I've ever had." Like, truly, this is it.
Right, right.
If other people were just listening, I'd be out of business.
Right.
People would not be coming to me, because if there's one thing I do well, Tom, I remember, and I am a good student. I'm a good student to my clients, and I remember what they tell me. And that is truly why my practice goes as well as it does. It's a pretty simple formula. And if I do it with my daughter, the same could be true.
Well, and, you bring up a point that, my son's 13. So we've been through some years of at some ages, they're not ready to experience the emotions we might want to tap into by feeding them these things like you're talking about. And you kind of can't force it. And also, there's no way to avoid the imperfection.
Mm-mm.
Things are going to affect them emotionally in ways that we're probably going to wish they hadn't. But what you're talking about with your patients is creating this safe space where they know they're heard. They know it's safe to talk about whatever it is that they may need to talk about. You can't lure this stuff out of them, but you can understand that we as human beings, and I think especially children, are resilient. And, if you do that, if you make it safe, there have been times Jack has come to me with things that I couldn't have imagined going to my
Your
dad
parents
with.
about.
Right?
Yes.
There's no way, things that he's been so shameful about, but he forced himself to say, and I could look, and someone taught me this too, you get eye to eye, get down at his level. And whatever that is that he's beating himself up for, that he's agonizing over, I can look at him and say, "Man, I'm proud of you for being so honest. Yeah. Give yourself a break.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay."
Content aside.
Right.
Content aside, the process that you just did, bravo.
Yeah.
Bravo for you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's big stuff.
It is. Wow. And, you mentioned the book, which you brought with you today, and you recommended to me a few years back, 20 Things Adopted Children Wish Their Adoptive Parents Knew. And you mentioned parents reading it.
Yeah.
But I've recommended it to a lot of adult adoptees.
Yes, absolutely.
Who, they don't even understand what their emotional experience is. They haven't factored these things in. They've just been confused about it.
And guilty.
Right.
And feel very guilty and unappreciative. Like, how could I possibly have these feelings? I should have gratitude and appreciation. So they discount it and dismiss it before they even investigate it. On top of the fact that if in fact I did, I was sharing with my sister, there may be a day that Song wants to figure out who her biological parents are. It would be very, very tough in China because they don't leave any documentation. It's actually against the law, even though they only are a one child. And that has changed a little bit. But at the time I adopted her, they were a one child family. And when they abandon, they don't leave any evidence because it's against the law. So for her to find them would be very, very difficult. But I said to my sister, if Song wants to do that, I'll be the first to support her. She goes, that's horrible. How disrespectful to you. I'm like, it has nothing to do with me.
Right.
Has nothing to do with me. It has to do with her finding pieces of her past. Of course she'd want to do. They are parallel paths. She can love me profoundly and still want to do that. But oftentimes for the adoptee or for the parent, they're like, I would never support that. How could they possibly?
Which, brings me to the point that I've witnessed many, many times in my life, that a lot of times when we invalidate another person, or that insecurity that would lead an adoptive parent to not want their child to do that, that's more about them managing their own feelings
And fears.
and I've learned the hard way at times. I might have the ability to be vulnerable and transparent with another human being, but that doesn't mean they want to hear it.
Yeah.
And if they can't meet you there, it's really, really uncomfortable for them, to the point where hostility might come from it, and they'll make it really, really clear, like, don't come to me with that. And it's because they haven't resolved that stuff within themselves,
Absolutely. And, the interesting thing that I have found with parents who are resistant or reluctant to have their kids investigate their childhood or their ancestry, is that sense of, I am going to lose you.
Right.
And the reality is, Tom, we don't own them.
Right.
We don't own them. And that became so crystal clear with the goodbye with my divorce. With the goodbye with my divorce, it became really clear, like, yes, we made a commitment, and yes, we made vows, and yes, it was intended that was going to last forever. But the reality is life changes.
Right.
It constantly changes. And I do not own him.
Right.
He's not my possession.
Right.
I hear, some of my clients will say, I can't believe it. That's so horrible. I can't believe they want to get a divorce. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you don't own them. They are their own spirit. They are their own soul. And that you resist will persist.
Right.
It will be a nightmare. And the interesting thing that happened with that recognition, the wonderful, wonderful gift that came from that recognition, that I didn't have to carry anger and resentment and, punishment, and is that not only in our divorce was my ex-husband one of my biggest fans, and me his biggest fan. His significant other became one of my dearest friends. And recently my husband passed away, and he left a life insurance policy for my daughter. He wanted to secure her future because it mattered. And if in fact there was that contentious, angry energy, that would not have happened. The office we're in right now belonged to my ex-husband. It was part of the divorce settlement. It was his. I paid rent to him. When he passed away, he left that to me. It was that generosity of spirit and grace that was in its full, rich color. And if I can bring that to my daughter, if I can let her know, I'm here to walk alongside of you, but I don't own you.
Right.
You can explore religions that are interesting to you. You can explore values that are important to you. You can explore your past. Anything you want, baby. It's yours. And I am going to have the great gift when you ask me for some direction, or I'll share it with you. But what you do with that, it will be yours. It won't be, you'll disappoint me or you'll upset me. Sometimes clients will say, I know I disappointed you. No, I know this is your life. I'm not under any illusion. I wouldn't be doing this for 39 years if every decision my clients made that were different than what I thought was in their best interest was going to devastate me. I would be a very sick human being. I really I'm just a tiny cog in their big, enormous, amazing life. And I want that for them. I want, them to explore and have adventures and richness. And that came from watching parents who had children who had the disease of addiction. I saw how sick they became, how devastated they became by the choices that their kids were engaged in or, pulled into, and how much they personalized it, how much it was about them. And whoa, that was a profound teacher. That is a profound teacher for me.
So if a parent's going to adopt, I think you definitely want them to read this book, right?
Yes.
What else would you want them to
know? Yesterday I was at a treatment center, and one of the clients I work with in the group who has been working very diligently and very hard, and she is an adoptee from Korea, and reminds me of someone we both know. And I said, I'm going to have an opportunity to talk about adoption. She goes, I wish I could come with you. I said, I am going to mention that to Tom. If we ever do this again, I would love both perspectives to be shared. I said, but let me carry it. Since you can't do that, let me carry your message. And she wrote this. One thing to remember would be that you're always loved, and there is always room for more and new love. And to remember that you weren't given up. You've been given the opportunity to make more choices with this new adventure in your life. I'm like, that's so beautiful. I'll be sure to share that. I mean, anytime you can talk to other adoptive parents and children and adults and investigate that, I would invite you to do that. Is there literature? Oh, I have no doubt there's amazing literature. But I am a big believer in the God wink, that the right people are placed in the right place for you to learn from, grow from. The clients that show up in my office, I'm always like, oh, come on. I got to work on this right now. I know you know what? I need to work on this. And so here I am working on it from this side while they do all the hard work. Man, what a job. I got like the best job ever.
Yeah. I had a client a couple years ago who, he just described my childhood to me. When he told a story, the older brother who emotionally abused him, the taking too much responsibility for things that really should be his parents' responsibility and things like that. And, if I was younger and not as experienced, it probably would have affected me differently, but, and I might not have known what to do with that. But I mean, he needed to know that you're not the only one who feels this way, first of all. And it's happened to me, and here I am. And I've gotten through it, and I'm okay, and I'm happy, and I love myself, and just to be that power of example for him. But also, here's a big one. When you have a sibling who emotionally abuses you, you don't love them any less. And so you have these mixed emotions because all you want is love. All you want is to love your brother or sister and for them to love you back. And you long for that so deeply, but also you kind of want to bash them in the head with a baseball bat.
Isn't that the truth?
Yes,
That the truth?
Yes, it is. It is. But also, there's nothing wrong with you for feeling that way. It's completely understandable that you would feel that way.
Yep.
And And, you know, this time now is about you healing from that and accepting that. So yeah, it is a gift to do this kind of work and to have people reflect these things back to us. And it's also, you mentioned being a student to your clients, which is really, really important, because the moment we take on that expert role and, you know, we talk down, then, you know, then there is no possibility for connection. There's separation.
Right. And lack of intimacy.
Right.
You know, and the soul of the therapeutic relationship, I think the soul of any relationship is to have that intimate connection. Like I see you and you see me, and we're not top dog, bottom dog.
Right.
We are equitable. I may have some information that would be valuable because you're seeking me out, but that does not make us
and
unequal.
You may have information that I don't.
Exactly. In spades. In
Right.
spades. In regards to how, you know, blessed I've been. Right now I'm preparing August 16th to travel to Michigan and to be with all my siblings. My mother passed away exactly a year ago, August 22nd. And we don't get together. We get together separately, but all 7 of us together at the same place at the same time with my mother's ashes brings up such emotions, such, you know, bittersweet emotions. Like there's a part of me that's kind of dreading it, and there's a part of me that cannot wait to be in the presence of 6 human beings that have walked alongside of me for 60 years.
Yeah.
60 years. And nothing hits me more profoundly than when one of my siblings validates. It's like I get to hear it from my mom or my dad when they say, yeah, there were times when that were tough. There were times that were tough, and there were times that were painful, and my mother's ending was difficult, was challenging, and for some of us we could watch it, and for some of us we could not. They could not be there.
Well, and you know, I imagine you've experienced this as well, but you know, being part of a big family and then stepping on this path of healing when you might be the only one in the whole family who's done it. Now, they've all had, not to cast aspersions or anything, they've just had different lives, you know, and they've healed things in different ways and had different issues come up. But the reason I bring it up is because recently, you know, I had occasion to talk to my oldest brother and be vulnerable, which is hard to do when you're in that position. Yeah. It's really difficult because you don't know that they're going to interpret your you speak different languages, and that the message might not come through clearly. And so it would be kind of unreasonable to assume that you'll be validated. But I did that recently, and my oldest brother, who's, you know, 25 years older than me, not that many, but 20, he validated. And, you know, in a big family also, you know, there are vastly different experiences between the youngest and the oldest.
Absolutely.
So he wasn't even there to witness a lot of things that happened in my childhood. So to have him say, yeah, I see that. I see that happened, and that must have been really hard.
That hits in a place really that is to the core. To the core of when my mother passed away, my younger brother sent me a note and just said, you know, thank you for being there, thank you for showing up, and there was that. I will cherish that note for the rest of my life, for the rest of my life, and the same way that I had some letters that I had written my father when I was in treatment that he kept and that I found amongst his possessions.
Wow.
There's something about that says you were here and you were noticed And then especially in a big family where you can kind of go under the radar and you wonder if anyone even knows you're in the room.
Right.
To have in a big family somebody say, I see you, and you matter. It's a big deal.
Yeah, it is. And, for me, being the youngest, that my way of dealing with all that was to just kind of try to fly under the radar and not be seen, go hang out in my room. And so I lowered my expectations, and one of the things I remember very clearly in adapting in that way was, having a father who was a lot older. I mean, we might have played catch once or twice and during my childhood. And, a little boy always wants that with his dad. And my oldest brother, when he would come to visit, he lived in a different city. I'd look forward to it so much, and I'd get out the baseball gloves and say, Mark, let's play catch. Come on, come on, come on. And I realized a couple years ago, in those moments when I did that, there was also a recognition that I wasn't really getting what I wanted, which was that attention from my dad. But I ended up getting it from brothers and neighbors, and, so there was a kind of a built-in sadness there too, I don't know how we got on that, but evidently it was supposed to
It was
happen.
important.
Yeah, yeah.
It was important. Big family phenomenon. I have a lot of friends from big families. A lot of friends. I don't know how it is that they have entered my life, but we have a common language, and it's fascinating. And we love it, and it also had some of its scar tissue.
Well, and that's, the response I get when I tell people. First of all, when you tell someone you're the youngest of 8, wow, I mean, that says a lot about you as a human being just from the get.
Yeah, I think so too.
But
that you persevered through
well,
it.
But it's just an interesting experience compared to the 2.3 children or whatever. But also, wow, that must have been great. There's an assumption that it was. But what really happens, not that it wasn't great, it was great in a lot of ways, but what really happens, at least in my experience, is there are kind of little subfamilies in the family.
Yeah.
The youngest of us, we kind of had the sibling relationships together, but I had siblings. I have a nephew who's a month older than I am. My oldest sisters were married and having kids when I was born.
Yes.
So they're they're more like aunts, probably.
Right. Exactly. Song has that too with her nieces and nephews. They're more like aunts, but they're cousins to her.
Yes. Well, it's funny because my oldest nephew, I mean, we went to kindergarten together. He's my best friend in the world. And I celebrated my 20th sober anniversary a few years ago, and I had him give me the medallion. And one of the things he talked about is I'm his uncle. He's my nephew. I have a son who is really his cousin, but he calls him Uncle Mike. And on top of everything else, we feel a lot more like brothers, and functionally we're more like brothers than anything else. And it's really strange, but it kind of reminds me like these labels, aren't really that big a deal.
True.
So, I mean, they are, but he will always be my brother no matter what, He's always been there for me, and I've always tried to be there for him. So you mentioned wanting to talk about some of the gifts that you've received from your clients over the years.
Yes, from my clients and from some amazing mentors that have entered my life at various times. Probably the first one that I want to talk about, because it directly relates to adoption, is that when I was getting close to the date that I was to pick Song up, a woman entered my life. Her name was Dr. Peg McKeel. And at that time, I had a a group of clinicians that would gather. It was called North Meets South. And basically our function was to come together, not necessarily as clinicians, but to come together as human beings. And in that, develop a referral source based on the human being, not the credentials. The credentials had become kind of boring. Like, my name is Joan Marineau. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, certified addiction professional, blah, 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 blah. It just became, I wanted to know the human being that I was going to refer to. Like, how do you connect and how do you show up and how do you form relationships? That was more interesting to me. And so Peg was one of those individuals who showed up because when it was in the North, it was hosted at my house. When it was in the South, it was hosted at Judy Heidrich's clubhouse. And so this woman showed up. She entered my house. She went into Song's nursery and she bursted into tears. Just bursted into tears. And I did not know her. I knew her really from another colleague, Dr. Valentine, Sally Valentine. She knew Peg real well. And she said to me, I have never had the opportunity to be a grandmother. Do you think I could be part of your tribe? Wow. I was like, okay. Yeah, that sounds okay. I'm like, well, yeah, all right. I'd never have met you. I don't know you, but sure, yeah, I'm always interested in new tribe members. Well, I did not know the level that this woman would impact my life. She showed up for Kira Song and I in ways I never imagined in 100 years. She was there when Song was sick. She was there when Song was, she taught Song how to swim. She packed my bags with all these little intricate things for Song when I was going to adopt her. She was just there. And I remember reading that when you're going through a major life event, the people you think are going to show up aren't going to. And the people you never imagined in a million years are going to show up in ways you never thought possible. And that was Dr. McKeel. She passed away of cancer. She fought a very stoic, hard battle, but never, ever in all of her chemo did she not show up for Song. Even if it was the Friday bad chemo day, she would still show up for her swimming lessons. She relished that. And I realized that people who enter my life, it is by no coincidence. They enter for really profound reasons. And I realized working with clients, because when I became Imago certified, I did Imago therapy probably for about 5 years. And then I just didn't want to do it anymore. I wasn't interested in doing it anymore until a couple came into my office and they wanted to do a goodbye. They had come to the conclusion that they were done and they wanted to eulogize it. And I was so moved by it. I said, that's what I want to do. I want to work solely with couples who are uncoupling in a respectful, graceful, loving way. Because I knew that. I knew how to do that. I'd done it personally. I believe in it.
And you reaped the benefits.
Oh my God. I got so much from it that I decided I was going to be the hospice. That's what my Imago friends call me. I'm the hospice counselor because I deal with the death of relationships. And I think they're important. And it was through that client. But probably my favorite of all of the couples that I've worked with was a couple in recovery. I had a couple come to me and say, we need a day with you. I'm like, a day? Yeah, a day. Because I need my husband to do the 9th step from my balcony. I'm like, the 9th step from your balcony. Yes, he's done his amends. He's done his amends many times, but he's never done it from my balcony. I'm like, that's a new one. I'd love to. Is he willing? Absolutely. He's 100% willing to do it. So they sat down and she goes, there are 4 events that occurred and I'm pretty sure they were in blackouts, but I've never been able to heal from them because you've never let me tell you, because every time I try to tell you, you tell me, but I don't remember it. I was in a blackout. So I I'd like Joan to help you. Just validate me. And so she did. She talked about some really painful events that involved abuse, that involved, verbal assault, that involved painful experiences with her and their kids. And initially he struggled. It was so much shame. There was so much, it's not who he is. It's not the soul of this man, not in any way, shape, or form. And she would say it too. It's not the soul of you in 2016 and when we were doing it. But it's what happened, and I can't get the film out of my head. I just need you to help me. And so he sat right in that couch where you're sitting, Tom. And she said everything, and he stayed present, 100% present, eye to eye, knee to knee with her, 100%. And then he did something I will never forget. He kissed every part of her body he had struck. He didn't use any words. He just kissed her nose, he kissed her shoulder, and then he just held her. And she said, I'm done. That's all I need.
Wow.
I'm done. I'm like, holy smokes. Now, I had witnessed physical abuse with my mom and dad, and I'm sure it was in drunken stupors, and I don't even know if my father remembered it. I know he felt shame the next day if there were things broken or...
Right.
But when he did that with her, tears streamed down my face. Mm-hmm. It was like I got to see my dad do that with my mom. And there was something that just, it was like balm on bruises and eyes that had witnessed such sadness and pain, and men were scary, and it was no more.
Wow.
And that is just a fraction. Those are just the things on the tip of my brain that I can say. There are just thousands of those, just thousands of those, Tom, that I have been graced with over the years, and I marvel at, and I'm so thankful.
Well, and when I can say the same thing about myself and about my career, but usually, I associate it with the people who I've met. And part of it is from being from a small town in Indiana. And, I've met people who, are from all over the world. But so many gifted, insightful people who have either loved me or befriended me or mentored me. And that's one of the things I got excited about with this podcast, because this is going to be an opportunity for me to talk to those people and hear their stories and reconnect. And it's been such a gift. And you're one of those people. So I really, really appreciate this. And I'd love to hear all your stories. And I appreciate, I speak that big family language, and so do you. And it's been really, really nice. I appreciate it, Joan. Thank you.
Thank you.
There you go, Joan Marineau. Could have talked for a long, long time. Didn't even cover a lot of what I wanted to cover in the first place. But she's got a fascinating story, and I really appreciate her time. So, hope you keep coming back. Got plenty more to come. Email the show at thepathtooauthenticity@gmail.com. You can find the show on Patreon. Access supplemental content by becoming a patron. That's patreon.com/thepathtooauthenticity. You can find the show on Facebook and Instagram, both at The Path to Authenticity. So that's it. Got plenty more good episodes to come. Hope you enjoyed it. Be nice.
did great, honeybee.
The Path to Authenticity is powered by Equivox. For digital marketing and web design services, visit equivox.com.